Hi everyone, my name's Craig and I'm here at Coots Paradise, also known as Dundas Marsh in Hamilton, Ontario. I'm standing on the edge of Princess Point with a spectacular view of the marsh. You may know Hamilton by one of its nicknames, the City of Waterfalls, because of all the creeks and streams that flow over the Niagara Escarpment throughout the city. Many of those creeks end up here in Coots Paradise. At the west end of the marsh is the mouth of what begins as Ancaster Creek, a very important cold water creek that begins 10 kilometers away and 170 meters higher up on the escarpment. I'm going to take you on a personal tour of Ancaster Creek to show you why it's so important and why we need to protect it. So come on, let's follow the flow of Ancaster Creek. Let's begin at the beginning. This is the Garner Marsh in Ancaster, Ontario, and headwaters of Ancaster Creek. It might not look like much to you right now, but don't underestimate its importance. It's one of the few wetlands remaining in Hamilton. Within the Ancaster Creek subwatershed area, 96% of the wetlands have already been lost to development. Said differently, humans have already destroyed virtually all the wetlands in the area, and that's a huge concern because wetlands are nature's way of controlling water and preventing the flooding that we're so often seeing now during extreme weather events fueled by climate change. The precious rarity of these particular wetlands and their capability to manage flooding is not the only reason they and these headwaters are crucial for Hamilton. The source water for this creek comes from natural springs that emerge from the groundwater below where I'm standing. That creates water that is relatively cold compared to other creeks, and that allows it to support many unique species. So of course this area should be protected, right? Well, definitely, and yet there's an active proposal to build 1.3 million square feet of warehouses right here on top of the headwaters, destroying the marsh. I'll tell you more about this on our journey downstream. We're now 1.5 kilometers from where we started, heading north through Ancaster. We're in an area bound by the Garner neighborhood to the west, the Hamilton Golf and Country Club to the north, and Highway 403 to the south. This entire natural area is being considered for development, which would only put further stress on Ancaster Creek. And there's already shoreline erosion here, which can only get worse as development intensifies. At this point, the creek travels through private property on the Hamilton Golf and Country Club grounds. As it travels through the golf course, the creek meanders back and forth, which is what water will do when left in its natural state. This is an expensive private golf course, so few will ever be able to see it in person, but this aerial shot gives us a nice view of it. The creek has just left the golf course, and as it does, it travels under Golf Links Road and into Golf Links Park, a pleasant forested area with a short hiking trail through the St. John's neighborhood of Ancaster. This 400-meter stretch isn't all that large, but it is a pleasant spot for a walk and a place for the kids to play. As it leaves the wooded trail, it crosses underneath the Ancaster Radio Trail through a residential neighborhood on the way to meet up with Rousseau Street. is Ancaster Creek when it meets up with Rousseau Street. And if I turn around, so is this. Remember those warehouses that a developer wants to build back at the headwaters? They would be accompanied by acres of hard surfaces like parking lots that will repel water. That means oil, salt, and other harmful pollutants will immediately be washed into the creek without being filtered by a wetland. And with increased extreme weather events, the proposed stormwater pond would be overwhelmed, and it's possible that the creek, including this residential section, would flood. We're now into the section of the creek that most residents will be familiar with. It's just crossed under Wilson Street and makes a stunning appearance at the Ancaster Mill. Ancaster, one of Ontario's oldest settlements, was founded by James Wilson and Richard Beasley. But before they arrived, this site was the junction of well-established Indigenous trails. In 1791, Wilson and Beasley built a grist mill at this location, followed by a sawmill a year later. A couple of years after that, Wilson sold his interest in the mills to Jean-Baptiste Rousseau. But it was the employees of those mills that built some of the first homes in Ancaster. The original mill burned down in 1812, and the existing stone mill was built by the Eggleston brothers in 1863. So, from long-standing Indigenous trails to multiple mills built over centuries, this rich history stands as a testament to the strength of Ancaster Creek and why we need to preserve it. This is the easiest spot to see the water up close. And heck, you can even sit inside for a meal and listen to the roar of the water over Mills Falls. But the roar at Mills Falls is nothing compared to here. I said, the roar of Mills Falls is nothing compared to here. This is Sherman Falls, one of Hamilton's most iconic waterfalls. If you live in Hamilton, you've probably been here before. If not, then what are you waiting for? Parking is available in the HCA lot just up the road. The creek continues from Sherman Falls underneath Old Dundas Road across the Bruce Trail and continues north through private property. Since you won't be able to access it, you'll just have to admire it from above while on the Bruce Trail. But it's a beautiful area and gives us a hint of what we'll see downstream. Let's keep going. Welcome back, and will you look at this? This is the most pristine part of the watershed, and looking down into the valley from above, it feels like we're miles and miles away from civilization. This is what most of the watershed would have looked like before settlers arrived. Much of this area includes very old trees, including huge hemlocks, black cherry, and oak species. And there are a lot of trees in here, but when considering the entire subwatershed, the forest cover still falls short of what Environment Canada identifies as the bare minimum. There's only 28.5% coverage, and the target is 30%. And when there isn't enough vegetation, erosion becomes a problem. And that means the water is full of mud and pollutants. It's also in this area that Ancaster Creek and Sulphur Creek merge to become what's called Coldwater Creek. Now, historically this water was cold, but it has warmed up because of human impact. It's colder than other creeks because the source water is spring-fed. If the builder gets their way and the Gardner Marsh is destroyed and replaced with a stormwater pond, then much of that source water will be left to warm in the sun while sitting in the pond. And that means even warmer water downstream. Among the at-risk fish species are rainbow and fan-tail darter, brassy minnow, and 3 kinds of dace. Further disturbances upstream would be a huge blow to these sensitive species. In 2017, starting in this section and working downstream, a team from the McMaster Biology Department established 5 biodiversity monitoring stations that will assess changes over time. If you've ever been on the rail trail through Dundas, then you know this spot. Officially, it's called Powers Crossing, and it gives you a beautiful upstream view of the creek. This area was once the Cold Spring Valley Nature Sanctuary and owned by the Royal Botanical Gardens until 1963. It was sold to McMaster and they paved over it, creating this monstrous parking lot called Parking Lot M. But there are big plans proposed to return this area to nature. The vision is to tear up all this pavement and recreate the marsh that was here, but with an artistic flair. It would turn all of this into a wetland that looks like this. Can you see the outline of a monarch butterfly? If accomplished, it would make Mac the first university to restore a wetland. That would be a huge accomplishment and something to be immensely proud of. But it would be tragic to have innovative restoration efforts at this end of the creek while allowing destructive development at the headwaters. This is the edge of the property where the creek runs today. As we've seen, this water is all connected and the myriad negative impacts upstream will accumulate here. This area around McMaster is also where our creek intersects with Spencer Creek, right there. This is also a very important area for the breeding of snapping turtles. Over the past several years, the Royal Botanical Gardens, along with several other local organizations, have invested a lot of effort to increase the local turtle population. But loss of natural habitat, invasive species and pathogens, and water contamination in the area are all factors working against them. The McMaster Marsh restoration would be a huge boost, but again, counteracting all this hard work here with destructive development upstream ignores the interconnectedness of the ecosystem. Here we are back at Coote's Paradise. That's the mouth of Ancaster Creek right behind me. After meandering through Ancaster and tumbling over the escarpment into Dundas for some 13 kilometers, battling an endless barrage of stressors, Ancaster Creek has finally arrived here. It started quietly underground in the Gardner Marsh, and now its waters will flow into Burlington Bay, Lake Ontario, and beyond. Before today, many of us might not have understood the impact our society has on water. But maybe, after taking this journey with me and following the flow of Ancaster Creek, you've started to gain an appreciation for it. We go about our busy lives, working hard to survive in a challenging world, and doing our best to raise our kids and give them a bright future. And we don't think much about the water flowing through our community. And it is the future we should be thinking about. We need water to survive. We need wetlands like the Gardner Marsh to mitigate the extreme storms we are so often experiencing now. We need the biodiversity of the marsh because it forms the base of the food web that supports us. We need all those things, but the Gardner Marsh and all of Ancaster Creek need us too. They need us to preserve and protect them. They can't speak up for themselves, but they have supported the peoples of this area for thousands of years, and now it's time for us to repay that debt. Today, they need your voice to speak wake up and say no. No to their destruction, and no to more pollution in the water. No to building on wetlands. No to endless sprawl development. We need wetlands, not warehouses. Let's work together to save the Garner Marsh.